So let's talk about Karl Marx, but maybe not in the way you're used to. We're going to use a really simple story to unpack some of his biggest, most complex economic ideas. It's actually a great way to get a handle on a theory that, well, literally changed the world. And it all starts with a crocodile named Crook. All right, picture this. Way back when, life for Crook was pretty simple. He was a fisherman. And super important, he owned his own net. So whatever he caught that day, it was his. He owned the tools and he owned the product of his work. Everything was his. But then things change. A new character enters the scene, a capitalist named Mr. Shelby. He opens up a big factory that starts cranking out nets that are way better and way cheaper than Crook could ever make on his own. And just like that, independent guys like Crook, well, they just can't compete. So what happens when your business goes under? For Crook, the only option left was to go work for the very guy who put him out of business, Mr. Shelby. Suddenly, he doesn't own his tools anymore, he doesn't own the nets he makes. The only thing he has left to sell is his time and his ability to work. Okay, let's break down the math here, because this is where it gets really interesting. In a single day at the factory, Crook can make 10 nets. Mr. Shelby sells each one of those nets for 10 shells. So you do the math, right? 10 times 10, Crook's labor is creating 100 shells of value every single day. But what does Mr. Shelby actually pay him for all that work? 20 shells. That's it. Just enough for Crook to get by, to eat and rest so he can come back and do it all again tomorrow. So, wait a minute. If Crook creates 100 shells of value, but only gets 20, that leaves a pretty big gap. And that leads us to the absolute central question of Marx's whole analysis. Where did the other 80 shells go? They didn't just vanish into thin air. According to this theory, they went to a very specific place. And here's the answer. That missing 80 shells is what Marx called surplus value. It's the difference between the value the worker creates and the wage they're paid. In this view, the surplus, after you cover the costs of materials in the factory, is exactly where the capitalist's profit comes from. This chart just makes it crystal clear. You see that 100 shells of daily value and how it's split? There's Cook's little slice of 20 shells on the left, and then there's the massive 80 shells of surplus value on the right. For Marx, this imbalance is the engine that drives the entire system. And this is where the economics side of the theory starts to feel very human. Think about it. Crook spends his whole day making 10 nets, but his wage is so low he can only afford to buy 2 of them. He's totally disconnected from the very things he creates. And that experience leads to another huge idea in Marxism. That feeling is called alienation. It's this deep sense of being a stranger to your own work. I mean, when Crookcheck was his own boss, making a net was an act of skill, of creativity. It was his. Now it's just a repetitive task he does to get a paycheck. There's no real connection there anymore. And Marx said this alienation isn't just one feeling. It happens in a few ways. You're alienated from the actual product you make, since you don't own it. You're alienated from the work process itself, because it's boring and repetitive, not creative. And because of all that, you end up alienated from your own human potential, You're just a cog in a giant machine. Okay, so let's think about their goals here. What does Mr. Shelby, the capitalist, want? He wants to maximize his profit, that surplus value. That means keeping wages low and work hours high. And what does Crook, the worker, want? The exact opposite. He wants higher wages, a better life. You can see how their interests are fundamentally completely opposed. And this fundamental opposition, this clash of interests, is what Marx called class conflict. It's this idea that there's a constant, built-in tension between the capitalist class, the owners, and the working class, the people who only have their labor to sell. So let's just recap what this little story about a crocodile has shown us. It illustrates 3 of the biggest ideas in Marxist economics. 1, that society is split into these 2 classes, owners and workers. 2, that profit comes from the surplus value created by those workers. And 3, because their interests are opposed, this system is always going to have class conflict. At the end of the day, what Marxist economics really offers is a deep critique of how capitalism is structured. And look, whether you agree with it, disagree with it, or fall somewhere in between, there is just no denying that this way of thinking became one of the most powerful and influential forces in all of modern history. It shaped nations, it started revolutions, Which brings us to the final question, really. Now that you've seen the whole argument laid out with Crook's story, what do you think of this analysis, this view of the relationship between work, value, and profit? It's a massive question, and it's one we are all still debating today. Thanks for watching.